to our Demystifying AI chat. I'm Amy Sandler, along with Jason Rosoff, the CEO of Radical Candor and co-founder, along with Kim Scott, who sends her best. Today, it's me and Jason talking about AI in the news. Jason, we'd been more hands-on the last few sessions. Today, you wanted to talk about the news. Tell me, why is that on your mind, and what specific news story felt most interesting for you to unpack today?
So it's on my mind because I feel like AI is in the news every day right now. And they're similar to how there is bad science reporting. I think there's a fair amount of bad AI reporting. And I wanted to, and there's especially a bunch of reporting, and I think the pace of this is going to pick up over the next few months. The US is in an election year. This question of the safety of AI and like how can we make AI safe? There are conversations going on about this right now that I think it might be helpful to take a look at some of the tools that engineers who are creating AI, companies that are creating AIs can use. Not every company is doing all this stuff, but all the major players are doing these kinds of things. That to demystify a little bit of like what happens behind the scenes to help make sure that both the inputs and outputs of AI are safe. And I'll try to explain a little bit about what that means. But there is a piece that appeared in Bloomberg about how Microsoft is increasing the size of their AI safety team by something like 20%, 15 or 20%.
And that was the one, and we can put that in the chat in a moment. I think this one, Jason, we needed an account for it, but if you do a search, it was Microsoft boosts responsible AI team from 350 to 400. So just if people were curious about the scale of like 20% of what, and I was curious, like, why specifically that story? Is it because it's Microsoft? Is it because of sort of what does responsible mean? So where do you want to start first on that?
So I was able to get access to the article by signing up. In case anybody doesn't have access to Bloomberg, I didn't pay yet, but I did sign up, and it gave me a free article. So I'm just going to read from it really quickly. So this is from Bloomberg. More than half of the AI safety team focuses on the task full time, meaning their full time job is to focus on how to create safe and responsible AI. Microsoft said in its transparency report, which outlines measures it's using to ensure its services are rolled out responsibly. The team's additional members include new hires as well as existing Microsoft employees. Last year, Microsoft dissolved its ethics and society team amid broader layoffs across the technology sector that gutted the trust and safety teams at various companies, including Meta and Alphabet. But Microsoft is keen to boost trust in its generative AI tools and mounting concerns about their tendency to generate strange content. In February, the company investigated incidents involving the Copilot chatbot, whose responses ranged from weird to harmful. There was an internal whistleblower where an engineer sent letters to the board of Microsoft saying, like, and to lawmakers saying, hey, this is a real problem that we need to address. And so part of this is Microsoft responding to some bad PR, essentially. But I think it's good. I think we should be putting pressure on these companies who are producing these tools because, like we've said in the previous episodes, it's great. I mean, these tools are fantastic. They allow you to do some things that you just simply couldn't do before, or were so expensive or prohibitively technically complicated that they weren't accessible to people. Like some of the, interview me as though you are a reporter from a newspaper. Like, that's not something you could ask a computer to do a year ago.
Yeah.
So
And
there
just
is amazing
if you are new
technology.
to this was something that, we were talking about in our last session of just, Jason, you were doing some different prompts around like, describe like I am your reporter that I'm going on a vacation, and, so
Yep.
sort of setting that up. And I think the rapid pace, to your point, that these are things that a year ago or even 6 months ago we might not have done. And also to your point, at least in the US, we are having a presidential election in the fall. So that felt like, when it comes to this idea of safety, trust, responsible. So like from your perspective, even just the names of these groups, of these teams, like if you are if you are going to work in one of these jobs, like what is your responsibility for being responsible or safety or trust? Like what is a job description for someone in one of those jobs?
So there's a couple of different things that these teams can work on. One of the things that they can work on is defining how like how customers of these AI large language model creators can use their large language models. So something that people might not be aware of is that when you sign up for one of these services that we've talked about, Anthropic or Gemini or OpenAI's ChatGPT, in the
And
terms of
Anthropic
service
was Claude,
was Claude.
Claude, right? Yep.
Correct. When you sign up for this in the terms of service, there's actually a bunch of restrictions on how you're allowed to use the system. So it says like you can't use the system for certain nefarious purposes or to try to produce, that might be likely to produce negative social outcomes. So they say like you can't. It's against the terms of service to use it to generate racist content, for example, or to generate other types of harmful content or imagery. So part of what these safety teams are doing are figuring out like what are the guardrails that we need to put on to our clients who are purchasing the access to these AI models, so that if we do discover that someone is doing something harmful with our AI, we have the ability contractually to shut them down. So that's part of what a safety team
And
is
so
doing, is
just
defining those guardrails.
can I ask on when you say the clients, so what are examples of the clients? So you're saying Anthropic is a client
No, I'm saying
or
Anthropic is a company and I am a
yes.
client of Anthropic. And you can
So
imagine
you
that.
the user. So when you say client, you're talking about just like B2C, like consumer and users are considered clients in this scenario.
Absolutely. So is anybody that uses the underlying tool set. So, for example, I might be an app builder. Maybe I make an app for the App Store, one of the many app stores, and I want to include an AI feature in my app. And to do that, I actually I connect to Claude, and I send requests from the app that I've created to Claude. So this is invisible to the user. As far as the user is concerned, they click a button inside the app that says ask a question. They don't know that it's going to Claude, but then that app developer is also a client. So they are using that technology to deliver a service to their customer. They're still a client of Anthropic in this case, or Google if they use Gemini, or OpenAI if
Mhm.
they use ChatGPT. And there are lots and lots and lots of people who are doing exactly that right now, who are building features into their apps that are based on these AI models. And those rules apply equally to those app developers.
This might be going down a path that isn't helpful, but it got me thinking like who is responsible if I am the developer and I create something potentially harmful? Like am I the or where somebody an end user created something harmful with my tool? Is it me, the developer, or is it the origin source of that thing, whether it was,
It is you, the
Anthropic or
developer.
it's me, the developer? Okay.
Correct. So part of the contract, so if you're using what's called the API, so instead of like going to one of these interfaces on the web that we've been showing in the last couple of
Mhm.
episodes, which is sort of the consumer way to use these things, if you're programmatically accessing these AIs, if you're writing code to access the AI, in the agreement that you sign, it says you must prevent people from doing harmful things. Your app must have in place strategies that prevent people from doing harmful things with our tool set.
Okay, so now can I double click on the word harmful? Like who's defining it and what does that actually
These
look
safety
and
teams are
feel like?
defining what is harmful and what each team, like, so the terms of service are different in different cases. Um, but like harmful generally means things that are designed to try to do something illegal. Um, there are lots of things which are sort of like where they've defined harmful as things that are antisocial. Like I said, like producing racist or misogynist content would be considered harmful. Um, and there's another type of harmful, which is trying to get the AI to do something that it wouldn't otherwise do, which is kind of like hacking, like trying to hack the AI, that's also considered harmful. And these app developers are responsible to stop people from doing those things.
How can somebody like, what are the tools in place for somebody to stop it? Or is it like once the sort of horse is out of the barn, is it like if let's say potentially a video of a somebody running for office or an elected official was misused and it's gone around the internet, hundreds of thousands of millions of times, like what are the repercussions after it's sort of the horse has left the barn? To mix
Yes,
metaphors.
yeah, a lot of metaphors there. What I would say is that the point. So I want to talk about the technology that they employ to actually prevent some of this harmful stuff from happening. Like developers, both the sort of language model developers as well as end developers are
Okay.
using. But there's nothing other than those sort of technological tools and the terms of service. If someone finds a way to get a large language model to do something bad and then distributes the result of that, there's no way to like stop to like take back what has happened. But what can happen is that whatever entity was responsible for minimizing that harm, or set of entities that are responsible for minimizing the chances of that harm getting done, they become liable under these contracts that they've signed for their failure to protect people from harmful output using the AI tools.
And when you look at, or the reason why this news article about Microsoft bumping up their personnel in this space leapt out at you, I'm just curious, based on what we've been talking about, like where do you think we are right now, May 2nd, 2024, with ability of these companies to prevent horses leaving barns or whatever the metaphor is?
I mean, I look, I think there's a lot of tools that are available. So let me switch gears for a second. And I want to, Taryn, I saw your question about like how much are they boosting their other teams. I don't have any particular insight into Microsoft, so I can't quite answer the question if they're beefing up other organizations. This is the question.
Mm.
I can't comment on that. But what I will say is that over the next year or two, I think we're really it's going to be a bit of a trial by fire to figure out what kinds of support are actually necessary to maybe at a system level prevent some of this harmful stuff from happening. So let me just describe, there are three things that, like technical tools, that I want to describe. Well, two technical tools and one very very organic tool that people are using. So the first technical tool is what's called a toxicity gate. And so when we've been in the previous streams, when we were using the various LLMs, I was typing something to the LLM, right? And it was and then the LLM was responding. And that seems very simple. There's sort of the back and forth. But what's actually happening is very complicated. Behind the scenes, what's happening is quite complicated. So one of the things that's happening is my input is being passed through what's called a toxicity gate. So they're using the LLM to evaluate my input and say, does this request appear toxic? And toxic in this case is like designed to do harm in some way, shape, or form. Like, can I predict that if I were allowed this response to go all the way through the process of being processed by the LLM and a response being generated, is it likely that either it's trying to somehow circumvent the safety measures that we built into the LLM, or is it trying to elicit a particular type of output that we know would likely be harmful? So that's what a toxicity gate does. And so every responsible AI developer is doing this, is either using the toxicity gates that are created by the LLM companies, relying on those the toxicity gates, or is implementing their own version of it. Because maybe they say, hey, I have a particularly sophisticated audience and I want to make sure that we're in these toxicity gates, we're catching some more sophisticated types of attacks that might not be, or attempts to circumvent the rules, maybe is a better way to say it, than might be done by the standard toxicity gate that exists in Claude and Gemini and ChatGPT. So that's one tool.
Jason, can I ask you a question on this? Is actually the first time I've heard the phrase toxicity gate. And so I'm curious, with the idea that there's a collective harm that could potentially be done, is there an agreement from like a consortium perspective that we, Microsoft and Google, Meta, et cetera, sort of we're sharing information so that we can do best practices regarding these toxicity gates, or is there a competitive spirit or collaborative spirit on that?
Both do exist, but I would say like even among the FANG, the Facebook, Apple, Netflix, like among the group of like mega Google, like mega Silicon Valley companies, there has arisen a spirit of collaboration to try to figure out how to do these things a bit more safely. And it makes sense because all of those platforms that I just mentioned rely entirely on advertising in order to make their money. And so they're not necessarily serving the greater good, although they might argue that they are. I think they're doing this in a way to protect the cash cow, which is advertising revenue. Because if it became clear that one of these companies' AIs were really failing to and allowing content to be generated that negatively reflected on the companies that are advertising on those platforms, like that would be a business hit for them. So I don't want to say it's like entirely altruistic. The spirit of collaboration is in part just like protecting their cash cows.
And that may be related to Taryn's follow-up question around, and this might be for a follow-up conversation, the percentage of how much these companies are putting resources to ethics versus the break things fast, moving forward quickly mentality.
I think they're the like with everything else. The sad truth is like too little is being spent on ethics and too much is being spent on moving forward quickly. But that's sort of the story of human technological progress. So I don't necessarily want to fault this particular group of technologists. So this is like a conundrum that has come up generation after generation, and we've always fallen a little short, in my opinion, of the ideal balance of those investments. Because there is certainly a lot of good that AI can do also in the world. So we don't want to forget that it's not just purely greed, although or like money motivation. I don't want to ascribe too much judgment to that. Like it's not just being motivated by money. I think people think that this technology could have really positive impact.
Gotcha. So you talked about toxicity gate was one
Number one.
technological
Number
option.
two is moderation. So what moderation does is it actually looks at the responses that the AI is generating, and it evaluates whether or not they violate the safety rules. So again, I type in a box, it goes somewhere, and I get a response, and it seems like that is a single transaction. But what's actually happening is it's like passing through this toxicity gate. The AI is generating multiple responses, not even just a single response. The AI is actually generating multiple responses. These are being reviewed by this moderation engine, another piece of software, AI software.
That was my next question, was like,
Yeah.
who's moderate? So AI there's no human in the moderation.
Well, I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
I want to talk about the organic thing in just a second. But it's being passed through this moderation engine, essentially, like or tool, or however you want to think about it. And it's evaluating those responses to say, are these responses harmful? And if it generates a harmful response, the moderation engine will not allow that response to be sent back to the user. And there's some complicated logic that can happen here, but essentially, moderation engines often cause the AI to respond in a way that says something like, it might say something like, I can't answer that question. Like you'll see a thing that says like, as an AI, I don't have this information. So it's a more neutral response. It doesn't say like, hey, you're being kind of a crappy person, and I'm not gonna like answer your question in an unsafe way, kind of a thing. But it'll say like, I can't answer that question, or it'll redirect the user. So they've done some interesting things to not punish users who try to do this because they've anticipated that a lot of people will try to sort of break the system, but instead to encourage the right behavior. So they'll say, like, I can answer a question more like this. And in some cases, what happens is the AI generates totally valid responses, safe and valid responses, and a harmful response. And in those cases, these moderation
Are
engines
you
are
saying in
flagging.
like, let's say it's one paragraph, you're saying 3 sentences might be safe and valid and 1 sentence might be inappropriate in the full response? Is that what you're saying?
I'm actually saying it generates 3 paragraphs and the moderation engine that are valid responses to the request. And the
Okay.
moderation engine says response 1 and response 2 are safe, but response 3 is unsafe. And so it still has to choose between response 1 and 2, but that's not the job of the moderation engine. But the moderation engine then flags that unsafe response so that a human being can evaluate, like, why was the AI able to generate this unsafe response? Because there's some things in the AI code itself that should help prevent those unsafe responses from being generated. And the moderation engine is sort of like a check again to make sure that those safety protocols are actually being followed. So that's one way that humans get involved, is like when moderation engines identify unsafe responses. In many cases, people are using human beings to evaluate those unsafe responses and then try to figure out, like, how did it actually get generated in the first place?
That is so interesting. So do you think, and you might not know, but if this 350 to 400 employees coming off on the heels of some of what was in that article around these sort of weird and potentially harmful responses, is the idea that those humans would go into this sort of organic moderation review of, like, when the AI has flagged something, then Amy or Jason is now coming along to be like, "Oh, why did that happen?" and then look into the code?
Yes, and that's not, they don't just wait for these things to happen. The last technique, the last tool that I wanted to describe is what's called red teaming. And red teaming is a tech geeky way to say try to break, like try to make the thing do something bad. Like try to make the AI produce an unsafe response. And so there are entire teams of people that either work for these safety teams or work on the engineering teams, that their entire job is to try to convince the AI to do the wrong thing. And in both of the cases, either the reactive, meaning like it generated an unsafe response and was caught by moderation, or the red team, all that the information that gets generated there gets reviewed by human beings, and engineers work with the people who have like collected that data to figure out, like, how do we actually fix this? Like how do we prevent the next person from breaking the thing in the way that the red team breaking the AI in the way that the red team broke the AI? How do we prevent the next unsafe response from being generated?
So the toxicity gate, the red teaming, and what was the middle one called? Just
The moderation
moderation in
engine,
general
yeah,
with,
or
yeah,
moderation
moderation
tools, yeah.
engine.
Um, and I think, like, it's, to me, the you asked a really good question, which is like, what what are the rule set that any of these folks are following? And that is where the spirit of I see the spirit of collaboration, it like most strongly, um, is a bunch of people trying to share information as quickly as possible about the different ways that AIs can produce unsafe um, responses. And uh, because I think the hard part is it's quite difficult to imagine all the ways that someone might break these things, and it's hard sometimes to even agree what all the wrong things are. So for example, there was a news story about, um, I think it was, I don't want to get this wrong, I think we mentioned this a couple of episodes ago, but I think it was Copilot. um, uh, but one of the AIs, oh no, it was Gemini. Gemini had to shut down its image generation engine because it started producing these like racially harmful, ahistorical images, with like these racialized characters in these images, and they had to shut it down. But there's even some disagreement as like, is that bad? like, are those racialized image, you know what I'm saying? Like, are the racialized images bad? Is that something we should be trying to protect people from? And I think that's the place where we can't, we need a thing that we don't have right now, which is uh like actual ethicists slash philosopher. You know what I'm saying? Like we need
Yeah.
like another layer, which doesn't exist right now. It's not a company thing. It's not a government thing. It's like, it's what we've human beings have relied on in history. Basically, it's like philosophers, like people who can help us think about how to define harm so that these tools advance human society as opposed to like further degrading the human relationships.
That I know we're kinda coming towards just the last few minutes. That was what was on my mind of those people being hired. Like, is this all
They are not
engineers, or is there
philosophers.
some, like, is there for those of us who may have had a liberal arts degree, like, is there any hope for, philosophers being hired at Microsoft, or is that
I'm sure
probably
there are.
unlikely?
I'm sure there are some. So to be fair to all these organizations, like I think that they have made some effort to hire ethicists and philosophers, like people who actually care about these things, like ontologically, systematically. You know what I'm saying? Like who care about like the reason behind the reason why this is bad, kind of a thing. Um, but this is all very new, and it's a little bit hard to predict exactly how well companies will integrate the not only the people but the thinking that because there are people across the globe, like techno ethicists and things like that, who are spending time thinking about this and are writing a lot about this. It'll be, I think it's going to be incumbent on these companies to, and again, partially for self-preservation, to find ways to incorporate that thinking.
This might catch you off guard, so if you don't have a great answer, that's okay. But in the same way that we kind of gave folks some tips and some tools about, hey, start with Claude and start with ChatGPT, is there a resource, either an article that you really appreciate, an author, for folks who are really interested in this idea of, techno ethics and philosophy, how to even sort of like a framework for even asking questions about this? Is there anything that you found helpful or interesting that you would recommend to folks watching this?
My short answer is unfortunately no. I don't think there is like a voice that has done a good job of like boiling this stuff down. Essentially, the way that I have tried to educate myself about this is reading a whole bunch of different um, uh, work, both from the people who are like the safety teams, or the people who are concerned about the safety of AI and like the objections that they have with the way that AI works, up to some of these ethicists. One of the problems with some of the techno ethicist stuff that I've read is like it's either too abstract or too technical to be generally useful. But what I will commit to doing is, uh, when when I post about this on LinkedIn, I will link to an article that I think is reasonably good. Although I won't get behind it 100% and say that it's a great place to start.
That sounds like something I can strongly support. Thank you so much. We've got just a minute or two more. If there's any questions, feel free to put in the comment. And then, Jason, just as we're wrapping, um, in addition to that link that you'll share around a pretty good start, if not a
Yeah.
perfect one, just why do you think this is an important conversation to have, and where would you like this? Like, what is in an ideal world? How will we be talking about this in, I don't know, is even 6 months the right number? Like, I don't even know what
I
time
mean,
frame
I
to
mean,
ask
6
you.
months from now is November. Um, right? Maybe a little bit more. 7 months or something like that is going to put us into November. Um, and I I think we're going to be faced with some very difficult moments between now and then. And the reason why this conversation is so important is because human beings, societies rely on expertise, on other people's perspective on things, because we can't all learn everything there is, all of human knowledge. So we rely on expertise, and that creates a vulnerability in our software, which is something that seems very expert in human software, something that seems very expert, but is in fact completely made up, can sometimes insert itself, like find its way, like it uses the like desire for expertise because we need a shortcut because we can't possibly learn everything. It uses that vulnerability to like inject information into the sort of collective consciousness of society that is actually very misleading or harmful in some way. And I think AI is going to accelerate the rate at which it's possible to generate seemingly expert content. So I think like that's my, for the next 6 months, that's my concern. It would be amazing if 6 months from now we saw a real spirit of collaboration among the leaders in AI to find a way, if not to directly combat or prevent harmful information from being shared, to at least find a way to identify AI generated information so that we have a backup to the vulnerability that exists in human software, where at least it gives us the opportunity to question, is this in fact like a piece of expert information that has been vetted or validated in some way that is trustworthy, or is this, AI masquerading as expertise?
Well, on that note, I really look forward to these conversations. I suspect Kim will have some really great insights to add when she next visits. We'll continue this conversation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being committed to learning about AI and to contributing to our collective understanding and using it for good. So, on that note, we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Be well.